Hello and welcome to TD Live's Free Agency Special, March 15th, 2021. Today we'll be focusing on the moves made by the New England Patriots. We're going to start by setting the table. I'm going to send it over to Dan to tell you a little bit more about where the Patriots sit from today's free agency.
As we set the table, we see that the Patriots reacquired Trent Brown for 1 year, $11 million. I would give that grade a solid A. What about you, Tom?
I completely agree. He's one of the best right tackles in the league. Watching him play here in New England, absolutely great in the run game, solid in pass protection. When you see him in person, he's just a mountain of a man.
As for Cam Newton, 1 year, $5 million, I would also give that an A. What about you, Tom?
I think they were able to get a nice little sweet spot there with the 1 year for $5 million. Initially, when the deal came out, it was rumored at $14 million, and it came out that the additional $9 million was all incentive based, which when you look at the incentives, you don't expect them to reach any of them. So I agree. I'd give an A.
At the time of that signing, were you thinking that Cam Newton was being maneuvered to be a backup quarterback? And how do you feel after their current spending today?
I think that with the spending, they have put themselves in a position where Cam Newton is the starter. I think that you're looking in the draft, maybe third, fourth round, to add an additional quarterback, developmental, and you always have the ability, or not the ability, but I would say the fear that Cam would go down from an injury. So I think it's very important that they bring another guy in on a cheap number or potentially through the draft here to support that quarterback room.
As far as Marcus Cannon, I think the Patriots made a good move here. They upgraded in the 4th, 5th, and 6th rounds, and also were able to save some salary cap. I would give that move a solid B+. What do you think, Tom?
I was shocked. I was personally shocked. I'm not sure what they're doing down there in Houston. First, cutting Nick Martin, trying to save some money, and then paying a 32-year-old tackle who sat out a year. Really,
not only paying the tackle, but also moving back about 11 or 12 spots in each round when you're already lacking draft capital.
Yeah, from the Texans standpoint, it blew my mind. I would give again a win to the Patriots. I think those three moves, very, very solid moves here entering the free agency period.
I couldn't agree more. I thought they were setting the table up for a brilliant maneuver into free agency before the draft to really provide clarity as to what direction this team is going. And as we'll get into today with free agency day one, where they spent over $194 million in total contracts, we'll get into the details and the fine print, and we'll also discuss where we think they're headed based on the moves they made today.
So one more thing to add there, you pointed out the $194 million number. I'd like to point out here that about $61 million or so of this money for the players that we're going to talk about today will be directly tied to this year's cap, really eliminating the cap flexibility they had entering the day. So if they're looking at any more additional moves outside of this, we got to start thinking about who the Patriots might be moving on from next or trying to restructure. So let's go on and get into it.
And I would also add additionally to your point that I think that $61 million this year takes them out of contention for a veteran quarterback. Unless, like you said, they're going to maneuver some of the veterans like a Stephon Gilmore.
I completely agree about the quarterback room. I think that's where, from my side of it, Cam's your starter moving forward, and you're looking maybe a Kyle Trask or somebody like that in the mid-rounds.
Now, as far as the front seven for the Patriots, this is where you really see the talent or lack thereof that the Patriots possess up front. At defensive end coming into today, they had Nick Thurman and Tashawn Bauer. At the defensive tackle position, they had Byron Cowart and last year's free agent dud, Bo Allen. What do you think of their defensive line heading into today?
To me, I looked at last year's defensive front, the front seven, as a weakness of this team. Obviously, they've lost some pieces. This was what was remaining from that front seven. A lot of work to do. I would be looking at free agent signings as well as potential high draft capital coming into this front seven.
Now, at the outside linebacker position, they will have Dante Hightower back and opt out from a season ago. They'll also have second-year Josh Uche third year Chase Winovich, second year Anthony Jennings, and special teams ace Brandon King. Although I think King might have to be restructured as he's a bit expensive for just a special teamer. So what do you think of their outside linebacker position, and do you anticipate Hightower playing inside or outside with the talent currently constituted?
Well, based on the moves that they made today in combination with the talent that they have here at the outside linebacker position, personally, I think this might be a move where we try to bounce Dante Hightower inside, or potentially they could be looking at him as one of those older veterans to move if he's not willing to restructure that contract.
What do you think the compensation would be for a guy like Hightower? And what team do you think would be interested, if any?
Oh, that's tough. It is a rather large cap number. To me, it would have to go to a winner. That's why I do mention the restructure. I think he wants to be here in New England. I think he understands that in order to kind of continue to round out this team or to build that roster, it might come to him reworking that contract.
I agree. I think one team that might have interest would be the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, at the inside linebacker position, they have Juwan Bentley, who's a very good run stuffer, but lacks a little bit of lateral mobility as far as the pass coverage game when you're going up against a Travis Kelce or a more athletic tight end. And then they had last year's undrafted player come in, Terez Hall, who seemingly had good reports on paper and in the film sessions, but it didn't quite translate to the field. How do you feel about their inside linebacker room?
To me, looking at this linebacker core, one thing stands out is they need to get better in pass coverage, as well as the struggles that they had stopping the run. But from my side, I think we're looking at some of these picks. We have a lot of pass rush specialists here. The Chase Winoviches, the Anthony Jennings. They're more third down specialists. From my side, I think moving Hightower inside, and if you're pairing him with a Bentley, I think that you're going to be susceptible there in the middle of the field. And to me, again, I'm not looking at that as a real strength of the team. I think you'd be looking more at a first, second down, stopping the run, trying to set up longer downs and distances.
So when you're looking at this front seven for the New England Patriots heading into free agency, what would have been your focus heading in if you were the GM of the New England Patriots?
To me, I would have tried to establish a bigger, stronger front, the defensive front here. One guy that we do not talk about today that did re-sign is going to be Dietrich Wise, another lengthy 260, 270-pound defensive end. From what I believe as a 3-4 defense, I would just like to see a bigger body size, more of a Calais Campbell type than a Dietrich Wise type.
And as far as the free agency period, as far as tampering is concerned, who would be some of the guys that you'd be reaching out to? Some of the guys that I was very interested in were Carl Lawson and Trey Hendrickson.
Well, to me, I think personally, when I look at this, I was looking at kind of lower barrel type guys. I'm not. To me, a Trey Hendrickson was a little bit too much from the cost perspective. I would have liked to got more bodies in to camp and see how it went from there. But let's go ahead. Let's get into some of the signings that they did make today. First one that they signed, big name Matt Judon coming over from the Baltimore Ravens. 4 years, $56 million here, 14 per AAV value. So Matt Judon here, 6'3", 260-pound outside linebacker, will be 29 at the start of the season. So that 4 years will run to his age 33 season. As a 4-3 outside backer, three main responsibilities that I look at in terms of his abilities. One, I think his main area will be setting the edge in the run game. I think the second here is going to be a situational pass rusher. And I think with him, some of those players that we previously mentioned with the Chase Winoviches and the Anthony Jennings, I could potentially see him moving off the field or moving to the defensive line in those pass rush situations to bring some of those younger guys onto the field. And third, when I see Matt Judon, for me personally, I think he has limited coverage responsibility. I don't look at him as a real solid cover guy as a linebacker. So from my side, I think it's a very reminiscent player to Dante Hightower, who we were just speaking about. With this contract, he's actually the 9th highest paid outside linebacker in the NFL right now. I'm not sure, Dan, if you have anything here to add about Matt Judon or any takeaways from some of the previous seasons.
Well, I think that Matt has had a bit of luck as far as the scheme that he's been in, considering that 50% of his pressures over his career have been on cleanup plays, meaning the quarterback has been rushed from the pocket, and he's been able to force a pressure or get a sack at that point, or on plays where he's been untouched, meaning he hasn't had a blocker in front of him, and he's been unabated to the quarterback. Some of the concerns I do have about Judon are his age. He's never been extremely productive for the contract that they did give him. And like I said, he hasn't been very good in one-on-one situations. Most of his rushing ability comes on, plays where he's able to kind of stack and get off the block when the quarterback rolls out on a dead play, and he's able to come up and make that play, which does have value. I just don't think he's going to be the one-on-one guy that's going to consistently get you pressures in the backfield like a Carl Lawson could.
I would like to point out the table here that we have in the top left-hand corner. Coming in last year, 6 sacks, 21 quarterback hits. In 2019, he had 9.5 sacks, 33 quarterback hits. Last year, they did bring in Agholor to the Ravens, which might have impacted some of this. But do you look at this as a year late, or you're paying for previous production, or are you looking at this as you're going to get the best years from Matt Judon moving forward?
I think they're looking at getting 2 Pro Bowl years out of Judon and then potentially looking to move off that contract. The guaranteed money allows them to have some flexibility, especially after year 3. But I do think he will be a productive player. He'll probably be their best pass rusher immediately. However, the price that they did pay, I don't really see the value in it.
To me, at that price, you need to be an elite pass rusher, double-digit sacks, pencil him in.
I completely agree. And although he is productive with his tackles, and he does come from a team that has had winning success, this is a very big commitment, and I do believe it's the most that the Patriots have ever spent on a front 7 player in free agency history.
When I think of the Patriots, I think of him sitting into that role of a Delius Thomas, a Willie McGinnis, a Mike Vrabel, that strong side outside linebacker coming up and setting the edge.
Yeah, he has a little Roosevelt Colvin to his game. He's not quite as quick, but the hopes are that maybe they can utilize him to his fullest potential. And this is a wait and see. I give the deal a B-, C+. I'm going to try to see the glass half full. Not a deal I would have made, but I do think he will be capable of giving them 8 to 10 sacks, which gives them a lot better value than what they've been getting out of the position.
So knowing from New England, from their side, they're not necessarily a team that cares about the numbers. If he can come in and do his job every play and set that edge, or go ahead and eat up those blockers, whatever they're asking him to do, if he can do that on a high efficiency level, I think they'll be happy with the signing.
I agree.
Go ahead and let you go through our next signing here, our defensive tackle coming from the Miami Dolphins.
From Miami, the Patriots signed Davon Godchaux to 2 years, $16 million. $9 million was guaranteed. Godchaux played 5 games last season. And no, he didn't sit out because of COVID, but he tore his biceps, unfortunately. He's been a decent run defender. I'm a little interested to see how they use him, whether he's going to be more of a nose or if they're going to transition into a 4-3 and play him at D tackle or end. He does have some good versatility. Kind of reminds you of an interior Adrian Claiborne. We all know how he worked out with New England. But he is 26 years old. He's 6'3", 311 pounds, 30th highest paid defensive tackle. And as we can see, he had very good production in his 2019 season with 75 combined tackles and 2 sacks. But he's not a pass rusher. He's a guy that's going to hold the line of scrimmage. And this probably means that the Patriots are going to move on from Lawrence Guy and Adam Butler. How do you feel about Davon Godchaux?
So I know a lot of people here said D tackle. We have him as a right defensive end or a D tackle. So if they're going to be sitting that 3-4 defense, I'd look for him to be filling that role of Butler more at that defensive end position. I think that from that side of it, he can clog the two gaps. I think as a nose tackle, he's a little bit undersized. I know 3'11", but that's still to my side. I would look at it and think of the Vince Wilforks or the Ted Washingtons, where we've really had those gargantuan human beings up right on that nose. So to me, I'd look at more of a D end here in the 3-4. If we're playing some of those 4-3 sets, I think he'd bump down inside, play some D tackle. But I wouldn't really look at him as a nose.
And for the price that they paid, I'm going to go ahead and give this signing a D. I really don't understand why they paid this much money for him. I don't think he's a bad player. When you're paying $8 million per season, you're expecting a guy that has that ability to really disrupt the game, disrupt the backfield. Only having 12 career tackles for loss over 4 years and 16 quarterback hits doesn't quite move the needle enough for me to feel very confident in this signing. How do you feel about this signing?
So the part that didn't add up to me is we had a late round pick, 5th, 6th, 7th round coming out of LSU. Not overwhelming production here. You're looking at somebody to clog up gaps. If you're having to pay $8 million for that type of role, you're going to find yourself in some trouble rather quickly, in my opinion. So to me, I think this is a big overpay. I think this speaks to the lack of depth on their defensive line, needing to get right. I would still look at them at 15 to be looking to bring in either another defensive lineman or a defensive tackle specifically, or potentially bring in a middle linebacker with one of those picks.
So a Christian Barmore on the D line, potentially a Zaven Collins at linebacker, and if they look a little later in the draft, Aleem McNeil out of North Carolina State is a good defensive tackle to keep your eyes on. Very explosive, similar to a Dontarie Poe.
So I would completely agree with Barmore there. If people think he's going a little bit too high, maybe you slide back to 18 or 21, pick up a couple extra picks, and take him there. But to me, I would look at him as my top defensive tackle, and I think that's definitely still a position of need even after the signing.
I agree, and we have to remember that people thought Ty Warren was drafted a little too high, and we know how he worked out. So for our next signing, we have Jalen Mills, who got 4 years, $24 million today from the Patriots. Just a year ago, he re-signed with the Eagles for 1 year, $4 million. He's 6 foot tall, 190 pounds. He'll be 27 at the start of the season. Has excellent versatility. He's played some outside linebacker at times this past season. He's been a nickel corner, a safety. He's played outside. Although when he's outside, he's probably at his worst. They kind of found his gold mine this past year, where they had him a bit closer to the line of scrimmage or dropping him deeper into the middle. In 2020, he had 36 blitz attempts, only 1 hurry, but he did contribute with 74 tackles. He falls for the double move a little too frequently for me. Shades of Jordan Richards. I wasn't too excited about this signing. If we look at his career starts, he has a 110 quarterback rating against him, 108 quarterback rating against him, and then his best season this year with the 82 quarterback rating against him.
So the thing I will say about that, though, is they, like you did say, he found his little niche here moving down inside. Looking at the average yards per target from a 10.4 down to a 6.6, I would be looking at him playing more in the box there against tight ends and running backs coming out of the backfield. That 57.6 completion percentage, that's better than the league average. That's somewhere in the mid-60s here at this point in the NFL. But ultimately here again, I look at the Patriots roster with Chung, with McCourty, and then last year's second-round pick, Kyle Duggar. And I'm not necessarily sure this was an area of need to bring in another safety type D-back.
Well, what this screams to me is that either J.C. Jackson or Stephon Gilmore, potentially both, could be out that door in trade bait or as a free agent signing. And that would allow them to kick Jonathan Jones to the outside, move Mills into the slot, and have good versatility and depth at the safety position, with Mills staying at corner mainly in the slot.
I personally think that's going to be the next shoe to fall. Is going to end up being what happens with Gilmore. Looking at him getting $7 million of real cash this year, still a $14 million cap hit, but only receiving the $7 million in actual money. I would be looking at him either potential holdout coming. If you're not going to move him, that deal has to be reworked. And I think with what they've done on today, they don't necessarily have the money to go ahead and do that. With J.C. Jackson, I would expect a high tender on him, trying to deter teams from coming in with any type of competitive offers, trying to get him back on a one-year deal at cheap money and then looking to rework him next offseason.
Now, what type of team do you think would be in the market for a Stephon Gilmore?
Oh, I think there's a lot of teams here. Not too many cornerbacks in this year's free agency at the top level. I think if you can get back a second-round pick for him at this point, I think you got to listen. And if it's mid to early second round, you probably pull the trigger and take it.
Would you trade him in division, or would you send him to the NFC?
I'm looking at him turning into a 30-year-old, looking for, I would guess, a 4-year somewhere in the ballpark of $70 to $80 million extension. I would personally take the best offer. If it's in the division, it's in the division.
I would think the Washington football team would like to have his services. As far as the Jalen Mills signing, I would give this one a C. He does have upward potential and versatility. At $6 million per year, it might be a little higher for the long-term commitment, but at the same time, this one has a bit more upside, I think, than the others, and is a pretty good value if you're looking at a guy that's going to be taking 75% of your snaps or more due to his versatility on the field as well as a special teams contributor.
The one issue I do have with this signing is that they have been so good in late round undrafted cornerback positions. Year after year, they've seemed to find these diamond in the roughs. That's one position where I don't think necessarily needed to go get paid for. I think Bill's done an exceptional job at that position.
I agree, and I also didn't have this as one of my positional needs for the Patriots. So it did take me as a bit of a surprise, considering I did like the contribution that Miles Bryant added later in the season as well.
So those were our defensive signings here. I want to just talk a little bit about scheme. As far as I'm concerned, I'm not necessarily sold on a 3-4 or a 4-3. We get a couple different images here. What we're talking about here are the down defensive linemen as the 4, and then the linebackers as the 3, or in the case of a 3-4, 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers. With the 3 defensive linemen, usually you have a little bit bigger type of defensive lineman, and you have your athletic rushers coming from the outside linebacker position. In the 4-3, you can get away with a Godchaux at defensive tackle and potentially a Judon at defensive end. So I think that's something very interesting to me as we continue to look forward. What is going to be that base personnel for the Patriots?
I agree, and the Patriots were always at their best, in my opinion, when they were in the 3-4. However, the Godchaux signing makes it seem like they're more of a 4-3 team, but they might want to have Judon rushing off the edge in the 3-4 as well. It's going to be interesting to see. Like Tom said, you're going to have your down lineman in the 3-4 trying to clog up as many blockers as possible, whether it's the left tackle and the left guard on one of the ends, the center and the right guard on the nose and the tight end, and the right tackle trying to chip in on the other end. That enables the linebackers to come off the edge and also to roam free. So that's something where you usually have a bit more beef, like a Richard Seymour, Vince Wilfork, Ty Warren, Ted Washington. Even when the Patriots had Lawrence Guy, who's a pending free agent, they had the versatility for that. As their roster is currently constituted, it's going to be interesting to see the versatility that they use, and most likely it will be a hybrid version of both these defenses mixed into one.
And one other thing to point out here, the majority of the snaps at this point in the NFL have been played in sub packages. So this isn't necessarily to say they'll be in this defensive set every down. We've obviously seen the amoeba defenses, the nickels, the dimes, and the quarters as well. So just from a first down rundown, usually you'll see the base personnel. So from the snap counts and things like that, mainly what we're looking at here, are we playing with the 1 defensive tackle versus the 2 defensive tackles? And are we looking for more of a pass rush coming from the defensive ends, or are we looking for them to be more of man-eaters?
Exactly.
So let's go ahead and transition here to the offensive signings for today. Exciting day in New England. A lot of signings. So you might like him, you might hate him, but here we go. Getting the party started here with Jonnu Smith coming from the Tennessee Titans. So Jonnu was, I believe, a third-round pick coming out of college. Ran the mid 4.6s. Wasn't an overly heralded prospect or anything like that. 6'3", 245 pounds, more of a receiving tight end. He's going to be 26 to start the season. Well, not too bad. So you're paying for the prime years here of his career. But you are paying. He's going to be the third highest paid tight end in the NFL next year. And when you think about that, to me, I would look at that and say that player does not equal the third highest tight end in the NFL. Last year, he had career high, 41 catches for 448 yards. Let me go ahead and say that again. Career high, 41 catches for 448 yards. What people really like to point out about Jonnu Smith, 8 touchdowns last year. So really paying for that red zone production on a team that had Derrick Henry with teams run committing. From my side, I'd look at this and I would say gross overpay. As far as the grades go, I can't even think about anything above a C. Decent player if you had him at a better number. I wouldn't hate the player. But as far as the offensive outlook from my side, I was looking at them as a power run team coming out this year. And you got to be hoping that Jonnu Smith can be above average in that play action pass game.
Well, this was a gross overpay, unfortunately. This is another case in point where you like the players, you don't like the value. For 4 years, $50 million, you need to be getting a guy of the ilk of a Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, somebody that's really unstoppable. Taking a look at Jonnu's numbers, 41 catches this year, which was obviously his career high. What's a little bit alarming was it was on 65 targets. So as he became more of a focal point of the offense, yes, he did get the touchdowns. However, seemingly as he became more of a focus, he was less effective. He's very good at running after the catch. He can provide a big spark as far as breaking tackles and making highlight reel plays. This is definitely a signing where the Patriots think there's big upside here, similar to when they had brought in a Wes Welker and players like that.
So I got a question for you here, though. After last year, moving up to get 2 different tight ends in Asiasi and Dalton Keene in the draft, what does that speak to them and their development that you're going out and paying top-of-the-line money for another tight end here?
Well, it definitely doesn't speak too highly when neither one of those players contributed this past season. I didn't like either player when they were picked. However, I'm not against upgrading a position and admitting defeat if you haven't made the right draft pick. I think it's smart, even like Washington moving on from Haskins. If it's not there, it's better to just cut the fat and move on. However, with a CSC, I think they believe he can be a formidable second option at tight end. I think they're going to work Keene more into the fullback role, where he can be a third tight end, but more of a fullback and a blocker, rather than Jakob Johnson beyond next season. The only problem I have with this one, beyond the value, is that you could have gotten a Brevin Jordan in the draft out of Miami, 6'3", 245, identical size, a bit faster than Jonnu, and you would have saved about $11 million. So just the value of having a tight end that's not a complete game changer, hasn't ever had 500 yards receiving in a season, this doesn't really make sense. I would have rather put money elsewhere, and even if they didn't like who they drafted last season, go get a cheaper option in the draft once again, or sign a cheaper free agent. Also,
yeah, so
if they were going to pay big,
for him to live up to this contract, I got to think at least 85 passes, 85 to 100 catches, double-digit touchdowns, because he's not giving you what a Rob Gronkowski or even a Travis Kelce would be giving you in the run blocking game.
I completely agree. This is a bit of a surprise signing. They had him as number 1 on their free agency board. They got their guy. This is one where they can really look smart if he blossoms. At the same time, this is one that I'd give a C. Like I said, I like the player. Can't stand the value. But, I hope he proves me wrong. If he has a season, 880 yards, 10, 11 touchdowns, they have Cam Newton at quarterback, so you can't expect too many catches. But I think he'll be productive, but not at that value.
Shifting gears here now to the wide receiver position, we have Nelson Agholor coming over from the Oakland Raiders here. If you want to sit here and tell me a little bit about Nelson, I'd love to hear
it. Nelson was a first-round pick out of USC, 6 foot, 198 pounds, first-round pick. Went to Philadelphia his first 5 seasons and kind of fell out of favor there despite winning a Super Bowl. He'll be 28 by the time he suits up for the Patriots, and they made him the 22nd highest paid receiver when they paid him $13 million per season for 2 years and $26 million. Last season, he had 48 catches, 896 yards for a whopping 18.7 a catch, and he had 8 touchdowns. And he kind of cemented his role, taking snaps away from their first-round pick, Henry Ruggs. Agholor was a $1 million signing a year ago. He was a big hit in that offense, and he cashed in today. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, when I think about Nelson Agholor and his time in the NFL, the first word that comes up to my head is drops. He's had problems holding on to the football. He might make a sensational play, but it seems like he struggles with the routine. Looking at the table that we have in the top left-hand corner, the thing that stands out to me is that catch percentage. Career high catch percentage of 66%. Most of these seasons here are 50s to low 50s. To me, that's just not good enough to be paying him as a number 1 wide receiver. The 48 catches, when I think about what we had on the roster last year, Damiere Byrd, I believe, was right around 45 catches or so. And again, that was a $2 or $3 million contract, if that, a low veteran salary contract. I'm not sure the production here matches 13 a year. The one thing I would say here is you're looking at 896 yards over 13 games. You would hope that he's going to be somewhere around 1,100 yards, and you're going to be able to have Cam stretching the field deep to Agholor on, again, some of those play-action balls.
This is a signing that screams to me Belichick is hoping that Chris Godwin holds out on the franchise tag after he sees Agholor getting $13 million on the open market. Agholor's a capable player, but like you said, with the amount of targets and the catch percentage, we just talked about that with Jonnu Smith. It's the same thing with Agholor, where these guys can make highlight plays, but the consistent moving of the needle isn't there. And that's going to make this offense extremely erratic, especially if Cam Newton is going to be the starter when he lacks accuracy to begin with. They'll really be putting a lot on striking on these big-time plays. This one didn't make sense to me at the number. I think if you got Agholor at a 2 for 12, it would have been acceptable. To kind of double that number and at 13 per year, I'm going to give that one a C minus because it is only for 2 years, and you can probably move them at the end of the year if you want to. If it was for more than 2 years, I would give this one an F.
I look at this, and he's a bona fide number 1 at this point. He needs to come in and produce like a number 1. We also did add one additional wide receiver here today, Kendrick Bourne, coming over from the San Francisco 49ers. This one a little bit shorter money, 3 years, $22.5 million, about 7.5 per. For him, again, a nice little pay bump from his rookie deal. 26 years old at the start of the season, 6 foot 190 pounds, making him the 34th highest paid wide receiver in the league. When I look at the production, I see 49 catches for 667 yards, 2 touchdowns. I think to myself, for a 34th paid wide receiver, that's a top end number 2 wideout. I'm not sure you have a top end number 3 wideout with the player. As far as the catch percentages go, a little bit better here, 60 to 70%. A lot of first downs on his receptions, 35 catches going for first downs, which you always like to see. But from the big play side of it, or even the possession side of it, I don't think there's enough to justify this contract.
I think the Patriots are seeing some things in the passing game that have eluded me. Bourne at 3 years, $22.5 million. Not a terrible or egregious overpay. However, when you compound the fact that you spent $13 million on Agholor and now 7+ on Bourne, that's $20 million right there. And I'd rather go after a high quality player or a couple other players that will really fill needs on your team. So if I had to, I'd probably sign a Marshawn Lattimore or go get a Trey Hendrickson before I'd pour $20 million into two guys that don't really move the needle for me. And there's a lot of depth in the draft, although the Patriots have struggled in the draft. I think they could have done a little bit better if they had waited a bit in free agency rather than making this signing. But clearly, this is a guy they value. He has been productive. He has played in the Super Bowl. He's played well in the playoffs. And at 26 years old, the sky's the limit for him if he can develop the way they think he can.
One of the things also to point out here, over his 4 years, he's only started 13 games. So obviously in San Francisco, they've run the ball a heck of a lot during that time. But they've looked at him and said, we run a lot of 2, maybe 3 wide receiver sets. You're a rotational wide receiver. We're not looking at you as the cream of the crop here. Obviously, they brought in Deebo Samuel. They had traded for Emmanuel Sanders. They've had him on the roster that whole time and have gone multiple different directions rather than bringing him into the forefront.
Absolutely. They even drafted Brandon Ayuk last year, kind of anticipating that they would have lost Kendrick Bourne here. They have taken a lot of risks at the wide receiver position, not always hitting on them. Bourne was actually one of their more productive players this past season, as Nick Mullins had replaced the often injured Jimmy Garoppolo. But I'd give that signing a C. I think Bourne can make a decent contribution. He's a pretty good run blocker as well. So hopefully he can really blossom in this offense with Cam Newton.
So I'd look at the core here. You have Harry, Myers, Olszewski, Edelman, now Bourne, and Agholor. The question mark here is obviously Julian Edelman, and potentially do the Patriots look to move on from N'Keal Harry?
Those are all questions. We have heard that Harry has been shopped. Edelman seems like his knee is giving him trouble. And we also get to look ahead to the NFL draft. So if there's a contender out there that wants Edelman, I believe he can be had. It's just a matter of physically if he's capable of playing at this point.
So that's going to wrap it up here. That's day 1, Patriots free agency special. We'll be back tomorrow. Any big hot breaking news, tune in. TD Live.